Hello internet users and welcome back to another video. So one of my favorite video game series has always been Resident Evil. There are a lot of games that I love to replay, but when it comes to Resident Evil specifically, I've played through many of the games several times. With that being said, it should come as no surprise that over the years, I've stumbled across all sorts of different mods and fan projects. And today, I want to talk about a really interesting one that I think more people should know about. Resident Evil Demake. Resident Evil Demake is a fan game with a very weird but very simple idea. It aims to take the original Resident Evil and remake it in the style of an NES game. I actually had my eye on this some time ago, but unfortunately it looks like it hasn't been updated in a long time. However, unlike a lot of other fan games you hear about nowadays, this project is one of the more complete ones. Although there seems to be no way to play as Chris in any of the available builds, you can still play it from start to finish as Jill. Now I think that overall, Resident Evil Demake does a pretty good job with its execution, but to really see everything it has to offer, we're gonna need to start from the beginning. The game starts out with a simple recreation of the opening cutscene. The members of STARS were investigating the Arklay Mountains, when a group of zombie dogs forced them to take shelter in a nearby mansion. And you should know the rest. The mansion is filled with even more monsters, and they have to look for a way to escape. Once you're into the game, there are a couple of things that are immediately apparent. First of all, this Demake is primarily based on the original PS1 game. Everything from the mansion's layout, puzzles, and enemy placement is replicated very faithfully here. However, there is actually one exception to this, where the game borrows something from the remake, and that is with the dialogue. In nearly every cutscene, the characters' lines are taken word for word from the remake. The only places where the dialogue matches what is said in the original game is when you encounter a cutscene that isn't in the remake. There isn't anything wrong with this, but it's something that just really sticks out to me. Like I said, the game does a great job at trying to be like the PS1 original, so I guess it's a little weird to see it do the opposite for just this one thing. Something else that I'm sure many of you have noticed by now is that this game uses a lot of visual assets from an NES game called Sweet Home. Using tiles from another game is pretty common in fan works. I do think though that this one uses them very well, and the interior of the mansion looks really nice. It's also a fitting choice since, if you weren't aware, Resident Evil actually began development as a remake of Sweet Home. So there was no better game to borrow from to help give this Demake a retro look. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about how this fan game handles the most important part, the gameplay. The original game has you exploring the mansion, collecting items, and solving puzzles. You also need to manage your ammo and healing items, doing your best to survive against the monsters you'll see along the way. I think that this Demake does a great job of translating Resident Evil's gameplay. We all know that fan games often have a bit of jank to them, so let me highlight some of the little things that the game pays attention to. Collecting items and solving puzzles is pretty straightforward. As long as you have the key item in your inventory, it will be used automatically when interacting with the right spot. And for the most part, keys can also be automatically discarded once you have unlocked all of the doors that they're for. The item box is also present in this game to help you manage things. You can store anything in one box and take it out from any other. Speaking of which, something that I also like is that this game recreates the iconic inventory screen. You can set up the weapon you're using, reload your weapon, combine items, and if you have any maps or files, you can check them out as well. Your health is also displayed here in the same vague way that the actual games do. However, on the save and load screen, you can see your actual health value on the file. This screen right here is probably the only thing that reminds you that this was made in RPG Maker. There are also a couple quirks with the inventory screen though. First of all, if you want to reload, you need to make sure you select the weapon first when combining. A very minor thing, but I'm so used to selecting the ammo first, so I figured I'd mention it in case you get confused when trying it out yourself. The only real issue that should be noted though is that there is sometimes a problem when combining certain items. If you have two squares of the same items, such as ink ribbons or ammo, if you try to combine them to free up space, sometimes it will get glitchy and end up giving you more items than what you should actually have. This is a glitch that's pretty beneficial to the player, so it's not the worst problem to deal with. Besides, let's not forget that Resident Evil Remake itself had an infamous glitch that could give you infinite grenades, so I can't be too hard on the dev here. Next, let's talk about how the game does combat. By holding down Shift, Jill will go into aim mode. When you press the arrow keys in this stance, you can turn in place, and by pressing Z, you can fire your weapon. It's exactly what you'd expect and works quite well. The same can be said about the game's different enemy types. Zombies are slow and you can easily run around them in most situations. It's not hard to get yourself into place and take them out from a safe distance. The dogs are a different story though. They're fast and have a little bit of weird movement to them. You can still run around them, but just like in the real game, I prefer the stand at the door I entered from and pick them off as they approach me. Hunters are pretty similar, but they're also able to do a leap. They can be threatening if they manage to get too close. There is also a couple boss fights in the game too. Yawn the Snake, Plant 42, and of course, the Tyrant in the lab. They're nothing too difficult, you just have to run around a bit and wait for your chance to shoot. One thing that's nice though is that the Demake scraps the V-Jolt puzzle. It just lets Jill make it right away in the chemical room. The puzzle wasn't hard, but it was a little tedious to do every time, so I think I'm okay with the dev taking a little shortcut here. There isn't too much else to say about these bosses though. By the time you reach them, you'll have more than enough resources to deal with them. Which brings me to my next point. Let's talk a bit about the game's difficulty now. This is one thing that I kind of dislike about this game. After you get through the first part of the mansion, you're going to have more items than you'll know what to do with, even if you didn't use the inventory glitch. When it comes to managing resources and dealing with enemies, I do wish that the game was a bit more challenging. Obviously though, I'm very familiar with how the game is supposed to go, so it's no surprise that I'd be able to conserve resources better than someone playing it for the first time. At this point, it sounds like I'm mostly just explaining basic things that exist in the real Resident Evil. However, the fact that all of these little things are here speaks volumes about how much effort went into recreating the game. Though, because it's technically not finished, there are a few places that could use some more polish. There is of course the occasional spelling and grammar mistake. The text on the shield key door mistakenly says you need the armor key. The armor key itself doesn't seem to get automatically discarded like the other keys. Some of the door transitions are jarringly out of place in certain areas. A few cutscenes with Barry are also not present, and the grenade launcher doesn't work properly sometimes when you shoot it. Overall, though, I would still say that Resident Evil Demake is a great fan game. Its gameplay is very simple, but also very effective for what it is. It may not be finished, but the amount of content and polish that it has right now is more than enough if you ask me. Recently, I finished it again, and it took me about 2.5 hours. I promise you, this isn't a case of someone just ripping some NES assets and whipping something together in 10 minutes. Sure, the idea of the game itself is one big novelty, but I found it to be a lot of fun to go through, and you can easily tell how much love went into making it. The idea of playing a demake isn't for everyone, but at the very least, I do want to let more people know that a fan project like this existed. By the way, there's something else that I want to mention in this video. I'm sure that a lot of you are already aware of this, but there is another Resident Evil Demake that exists. There was at one point a full port of Resident Evil being developed for the Game Boy Color. However, Capcom wasn't pleased with how its development was going and outright canceled it. This unfinished Game Boy port has since been leaked online and has gained a lot of attention from fans due to how weird and ambitious the project was. Taking a PS1 game and recreating its shooting, fixed camera angles, and tank controls on the Game Boy of all things is a pretty weird idea to say the least. So after playing the fan game, I can't help but wonder, what if they instead tried to do what Resident Evil Demake did? If we had gotten something similar to Demake on the Game Boy, maybe it would have been able to see a proper release and perhaps be remembered as a cult classic. Instead though, what we eventually did get for the Game Boy was Resident Evil Gaiden. And well, there's a good reason that everyone just forgets that one exists. But that's a topic for a whole other day. One last thing though, I want to take a chance to mention another Resident Evil fan game, BioEvil 4. While not exactly a demake in the same way the other game was, BioEvil 4 is a retro-inspired side-scroller, obviously based on RE4. In its current form, there's only a couple levels in a boss fight, but it's a lot of fun to play through. There's so much little attention to detail and just good gameplay. I think the footage here really speaks for itself. This one even has a few difficulty settings and can be pretty hard on Pro. Maybe I'll come back to dive into this one another time, but if I didn't at least mention BioEvil 4 today, I'd probably get 1,000 comments asking if I knew about it. Anyways, I do highly recommend checking out Resident Evil Demake. It's enough fun to play on its own that I'd see myself coming back to it if it ever gets updated again. For this game to have gotten as far as it did is impressive, and I think it deserves more appreciation. But that's going to be it for this video. My name is Pikasprey, and thanks for watching.